You won't find them just anywhere. They aren't that level of random. They're usually in places that have something distinct about them. They may be buried at the foot of some landmark, or a burial ground, or inside a tiny room you may not have noticed otherwise, or... Get it, guys? At the foot? Eh? Eh? Yeah, I ruined it. Something I forgot to mention about Sonic Adventure is that it can actually be played as a co-op game. Yeah, just like in the Genesis games, when you're playing as Sonic and Tails is tagging along, you can plug in a second controller and let a friend play as Tails. If they lag too far behind or fall into a pit, they'll just reappear next to you without costing you any lives, and they can collect rings and destroy enemies and everything. Well, maybe not everything. One of the coolest things you could do in games like Sonic 3 is let a friend carry you to higher places that would normally be out of reach using Tails' ability to fly. I don't think you can do that in this game though. Oh well, it's still nice that they let you play like this. Now someone else can get on the fun, and if they're not as good at these sorts of games as you are, it's alright. As I said in part 2, Sonic the Hedgehog is the longest story campaign in Sonic Adventure 1, and he visits more stages than anyone else. If someone just wants a decent Sonic experience and doesn't care enough about the other characters to bother with their campaigns, they can seriously just play through Sonic's campaign, the only one available when you first boot up the game, and breeze through uninterrupted. And all of the other characters are unlocked by the time you finish this campaign, but they're completely optional and you don't have to play through Rumble Coast a second time as Tails halfway through Sonic's story. Heck, even the final boss of Sonic's campaign is a decent Scrap-Brain-esque encounter. If you just play through this chunk of the game and decide you've had a good enough time, you can just end it there and call it a day. Boom, there's your Sonic game. This isn't like other games like Adventure 2 or heck 06 where you keep having to play as other characters through various stretches right in the middle of what's essentially still a Sonic campaign. If Sonic is all you need and you want to play as him all the time, this game's got you covered. As much extra fat as it may have tacked onto it, he's still the core of this game, and all the other characters' campaigns are only half as long as his, sometimes even shorter than that. Amy's campaign is one of the shortest of them all. She only has 3 stages, 1 mandatory minigame, and 1 boss. You can complete her campaign in half an hour, maybe even 20 minutes. In terms of her controls, she's one of the slower characters, but she's still built around the philosophy of speedrunning somewhat. Amy can destroy enemies by crushing them with her hammer, but she can't move while doing this. However, if you run long enough to hit Amy's top speed, she no longer has to stop to pull out her hammer. She now holds her hammer while running, and hitting an enemy with it then, or even just smacking the ground with it, will sort of pole vault Amy into the air, getting much bigger hang time and traveling further than an ordinary jump would carry her. She then resumes her stride as she hits the ground, maintaining her top speed unless the player slows down on purpose so they hit an incline that's steep enough to impede Amy's movement, or some other obstacle that's too great for her to clear this way. Throughout the 3 stages, you're being tailed by this prototype E-Series robot named Zero, as opposed to E101, Beta, E102, Gamma, and so on. Zero looks nothing like the other E-Series robots, so it would probably be the easiest of the bunch for a character like Sonic to defeat, but for the slower, underpowered Amy, he becomes more of a challenge without going overboard. If Zero grabs or kills you, well, obviously the stage is over. If you can't outrun Zero, you can keep him at bay by hitting him with your hammer, making him reel back for a few seconds and giving you a chance to escape, but you can't become dependent on resorting to this, since hitting him too many times will trigger a sort of berserker state where he becomes more aggressive and won't take any more damage, making him harder to outmaneuver. Naturally, Zero's presence pressures the player to keep going as fast as they can, as if they weren't already. And seeing how Amy's own mechanics change when she hits top speed, the game simply becomes easier when you're going fast. Simply put, as far as the mechanics go, Amy is still as focused on speedrunning as any other Sonic character. It's kind of a downer then that the level design often impedes the player's ability to do this. Amy's levels are some of the most interesting in the game in that she gets to access several areas that the other characters can't, some of which feel more like set pieces out of some Prison Break movie than a typical zone. There are a lot of fun little moments like running through a ventilation shaft only to wind up in a restroom a Bunnix made for guests he's never going to have, or seeing Zero appear on the screen only for him to jump out of it, things that Sonic and the rest don't ever get to see. Twinkle Park makes this clear immediately. Amy visits some of the areas Sonic does, but unlike Sonic, she gets to go inside the castle that the entire level is built around. Inside is claustrophobic, the mirrors can play tricks on you, and you're basically at the mercy of the level. It's interesting to be able to play through these Amy-centric areas, but some of them really are a slog, and you don't get that many opportunities to reach Amy's top speed. Oddly enough, Amy's first stage, Twinkle Park, and last stage, Final Leg, are quite short compared to the middle stage, Hot Shelter. Hot Shelter is one of the oddest and most interesting stages that was left in the final game, because Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, the main trio of the series, never visit any part of this stage. It's relegated entirely to what you could call side characters, as Amy, Gamma, and Big all enter it. It's a rather large stage, with entire chunks of it dedicated to specific characters, even Big. To some extent, when you put all these character-specific parts together, it begins to feel more like a giant hub world inside the egg carrier than a standard level. It isn't actually that long from A to B when you play as Amy, but it can take a long time because you constantly get slowed down by various obstacles, including a few puzzles, though things like cranking doors open or waiting for other doors to slowly open on their own is just blatant padding. I wouldn't mind any of this as much as I do if it didn't prevent Amy from reaching what potential she has. There's some fun platforming to be had, but not much else. After you beat these 3 stages, you take on Zero in a boss fight. You hit him 3 times, the fewest out of any boss in the game, and Amy's campaign is over before anything interesting happens. Amy's campaign is inoffensive and short. It's another distraction that can be fun at times, but doesn't do anything remarkable. It's basically filler. Gamma's campaign, on the other hand, is much more interesting in terms of both gameplay and character development. Being a robot, he's appropriately clunky and weighty, but not too much. He isn't hard to control, he just has a nice sense of heft to him, and he's still pretty fast as far as these other characters go. He's got a really funky walk cycle, but like Amy, hitting his top speed triggers a special function, except this doesn't stop if you slow him down. In this case, he'll compress into a sort of vehicle mode with wheels on his legs, and he'll keep doing this until you jump, forcing him back into his normal walking mode. Until you do that, he stays like this, so there's no pressure to constantly run like there is with Amy, at least not in this regard. He even has a third mode for hovering above water. I take it he isn't waterproof then. There's a couple of upgrades you can get on the egg carrier that greatly improve his abilities. The first is a hover pack that just sort of floats behind him and enables him to glide over chasms that would normally be impossible for him to cross. It makes a cool sound and feels good to use. The second optional power-up is an upgrade to his gun. Yeah, Gamma can't run over enemies or slice through them or anything like that, he just blows them up. The gun power makes it so every hit you land on an enemy creates an explosion that just might swallow other enemies at the same time, but this power-up really isn't nearly as helpful as the jetpack, it's just sort of there. So yeah, Gamma is a robot that blows up other robots in the best way possible for a Sonic game. Like I've kept saying, Sonic is a speed-focused game. It's also good for exploration, but part of the reason why you explore is to find quicker routes to the end. For some like myself, it's the best part. Every character we've looked at so far has abilities that facilitate and encourage going fast, even if their gameplay doesn't, and Gamma is no different. See that? Notice how that timer is going down instead of up? That clock is a death sentence. If you don't reach the end of the stage before it hits 0, Gamma's batteries will run dry and he'll break down on the spot. So how do you keep this from happening? What is Gamma's fuel? How does he keep going? By killing things, of course. When you blow a bandix, extra seconds are added to the timer. See, when you attack an enemy, you can hold down the button to lock onto them before firing, giving you a few extra seconds to catch more enemies in your sight, then blast them all at once with a volley of missiles. The more enemies you hit with that one attack, the higher your combo goes. The higher your combo is, the more seconds are added to the timer. So while it's important to go fast and reach the end of the stage before time is up, you have a much better shot at making it by blowing up a bunch of enemies on the way than you would if you just rushed to the end, only passingly destroying a few here and there and ignoring most of them. Gamma is 5 stages, and it might just be that I'm crazy, but the way they teach the player these mechanics is kinda brilliant if you ask me. The first 2 stages are nothing to write home about. They're really just a chance to get the hang of how Gamma controls. Most people probably won't even notice a timer at first because these stages are so short that even if you pace yourself, you'll almost surely reach the goal before time becomes an issue. Once you get to Windy Valley though, it becomes a completely different game. This stage, while it's still not that long, as it's just the first act, is still much longer than the previous stages. And Gamma may be pretty spry as far as a robot with his kind of build goes, but he isn't that fast. I like that the stage opens with a part that's exclusive to his character. Sonic can't even make it up here, he starts at the bottom of the chasm that follows. Anyway, if the stage's length doesn't pressure you to pick up the pace, the fact that there's a boss at the end will. Now these bosses don't take very long to put down, but if you reach them and you only have a few seconds left, you're screwed. There are no more targets to hit for extra time. I think it's great then that the stage gives you ample opportunities to hit other targets on the way, with these flying purple flame caterpillar thingies. These guys are like 10 enemies hitboxes chained together, and I think they were designed specifically for Gamma. There's no reason to design an enemy with so many hitboxes when all it takes is one hit from a character like Sonic to bring them down. They don't break apart like caterpillars in the Genesis games did, they just vanish. Highlighting every part of their bodies with Gamma's reticule though will lend you a whopping 40 seconds. This is good practice for hitting multiple enemies. Hilariously though, some people will make it this far and still not get it. I can think of one such person. Are you getting tired of these callouts? If people really don't think this game tries hard enough to telegraph what's happening to the player, I point you to the giant numbers that appear on the screen when you blow things up, then fly across the screen and get sucked into the timer, which even makes a sound as it goes up. The only way the game could make this more obvious is if it froze and flashed a tutorial message in the player's face in big neon text. Sonic Adventure, Omochao Edition. Like really, who isn't going to put 2 and 2 together here, Hot Shelter is another brilliant example of making the best use of Gemma's abilities to teach the player. There's this part where you're falling down a big open shaft and there are ledges with enemies on them. Here, by combining Gemma's abilities, you can slow your descent with a hover pack long enough to spin around and lock onto all the enemies, giving you huge bonus time. You don't want to fall straight down, you'll miss most of the targets. Of course, you don't want to hover all the way down either, because that'll just take too long. So you let go of it and fall for a little bit, then stop to hit more enemies. It's a good trade-off, and pretty clever enemy placement. Yet another opportunity to make good use of Gemma's abilities placed in the stage. They could have simply given Gemma a more generous allotted time to complete his stages and left it at that, something like 5 or 6 minutes. But the way you have to feed the timer by making the most of Gemma's abilities adds a lot of depth to his gameplay. So he is still a speed-focused character, but it's not about simply barreling to the end and ignoring everything in the level. It's about your performance overall, it's a balancing act, and it's pretty intuitive. Gemma is a flexible character gameplay-wise, and I think he's pretty fun for what he is. I also think he's a great character story-wise, with his unique voice, simple dialogue, and one heck of an ending. So that's most of the other characters you get to play as in this game. As different as their gameplay may be, they're all still focused in some way on going fast, and their campaigns are over pretty quickly. They're not bad, in fact they're pretty harmless, although Amy's is the worst we've reviewed so far. Still, they're at least not beyond saving. However, there's one character I've saved for last that brings this game down a lot more than he really should. So many times I've heard people say that the mere inclusion of Big the Cat was a last straw for them, and that any redeeming qualities the rest of the game has are easily outweighed and invalidated by this one blob that completely ruins the game for them. You could tell them about all the things you love about Sonic Adventure's other campaigns, but it doesn't matter. They won't listen. All they have to say in response is, Big the Cat, and they've successfully killed the conversation. He's a buzzword, a joke. So many times when Sonic Adventures appear in some list of games that could have been good if things went a little differently, but weren't, the main point of contention people point to is a mere existence of Big the Cat, and I'm still trying to figure out why. I guess it's supposed to be symbolic of a bigger issue, of Sonic Team losing their way, going too far over the edge. You know, that old thing about how once you stare into the abyss you can't look away, and you just keep staring and eventually fall in. Yeah, I guess Big is sorta like that. His is the one campaign I feel no need to justify whatsoever. More like I'll excuse it. I really do think that, like a lot of other things people get mad about, there's been a strong overreaction to Big's inclusion in this game. He is definitely the most pointless. He doesn't even contribute anything to the story himself. If anything, Froggy's the main character here. Poor little guy keeps trying to get away from Big and he just gets more holes in his lips for it. I will say I like Big as a character more than I should. I think he's really well designed as far as the more modern Sonic characters go. He deviates from the standard wiry frame that sort of makes most of the other characters look the same, but he fits right in terms of style. Also, he's probably the most progressive video game character ever created, or at least for his time. I mean, he's mentally handicapped, he's obese, he's a furry, he's probably even black. What more could you want? I'm a bad person, aren't I? So here's how this works. Big is an incredibly slow character. He can pull himself up ladders faster than anyone else with those massive arms of his, but his legs are too short for him to get anywhere on his own. It doesn't matter much though, since his stages are incredibly small. Your objective is usually right in front of you at the start of the stage. So what do you do here? Go fishing, of course. So yeah, this is Big's gameplay. It's the one campaign where speed isn't a focus at all. There's no timer or countdown anywhere, and thank God, because fishing is just awkward. Now you might catch Froggy on your first or second try in Twinkle Park, I usually do, but every stage after that can take forever. Well, more like a couple minutes, but that may as well be forever in a Sonic game. The idea is to find which body of water Froggy is swimming in, cast your lure as close to him as you can, and then wiggle the lure around to entice Froggy. Froggy's AI is okay, getting his attention is super basic, and yeah, pretty easy. Getting him to actually bite down on the lure so you can reel him in is a hard part. I don't know if fishing for frogs or frogging usually plays out like this in real life, but jeez, I think I might have just invented a euphemism for a sex thing. Anyway, there have been so many times where Froggy would wrap his lips around the lure, oh god, but wouldn't get hooked. He'd just go nyum 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 for a little bit, and then faff off to swim on his merry way. For people trying to get through this quickly, this could become a nightmare. I swear, I remember this being really easy a few times in the past. I could tell you there's some special trick to it, that if you just flick your wrist or move the lure the right way when it's in Froggy's mouth, then it'll latch on. And I'm sure there is such a trick, but I haven't found it. You just gotta keep trying until you finally get him. Once he's hooked, a minigame begins and you have to reel him in. If you pull too hard or too quickly, the line will break and cost you a life because Big has a heart attack on his way to get another line at the store. In Hot Shelter, this part of the game can start to feel pretty drawn out, as Froggy struggles harder and harder to get away from this freak. I mean, he really fights you on this. He does not want to spend another minute with this guy. Once he's within 3 meters though, the stage is basically over. If you want, you can get plenty of lure upgrades and use them to catch bigger and more interesting things, if you want. I'll be honest, Big's gameplay really isn't that bad. I mean, it's a fishing simulator, and I think it's pretty spot on in that regard. It's not like the fishing minigame in Ocarina of Time is much better, but you see, people have a much easier time forgiving that because this is a Sonic game. And for them, even though this campaign could be complete in less than 10 minutes, it's such a pace breaker that they can't just let this one slide. They need the world to know how awful Big the Cat is and how much he ruined this game for them. I don't think he's even that bad of a character, he's just a great big doof. If this gameplay were more developed, I could see Big having his own spin-off game instead of being introduced in this one, just fishing in various Genesis and adventure themed stages with the other characters making cameos. But that's not how it goes. He's here, and he's not going away, and he's one of the last campaigns you need to beat in order to unlock the final campaign. He comes and goes pretty quickly, but he's still an unfortunate mark against this game. Anyway, I think Sonic Adventure is a fine game. It's got a lot of problems, sure, but it has a lot of redeeming qualities that make up for those problems. People act like games need to be flawless because they only have enough spare cash or time to play so many games anyway, so whatever few games they are able to play better be downright stellar, and anything less is just a waste of time for them. When I uploaded part 1, Roger Vander Wade of Sonic Dissected left a very insightful comment that I just had to share, and I think it sums up a lot of people's experience with Sonic Adventure. The real problem, I think, is how hype poisons the mind. Tons of people highly praise Sonic Adventure, giving critics the, yeah, well this better be good then mindset, and when you're in that mindset, any piece of media is doomed, especially Sonic Adventure 2 has this. I swear, all these "this is why Sonic Adventure 2 sucks" lists, half of the problems aren't even the game's fault but the way fans interact with it. It creates annoying shadow fans, it inspires recolors, rouge porn. One thing I realized with myself, that 2 of my 3 favorite Sonic games, Adventure 1 and Generations, I love them almost entirely on their potential rather than what they are. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, only one I enjoy for the complete package. I think that's how we should look at Sonic Adventure 1. Acknowledge its purpose as a pioneer game. See it as a tech demo, the programmers throwing everything they can on screen to show the possibilities. When I played Sonic Adventure 1 on my Dreamcast back in 1999, I did love it by its own merits, but now I have a hard time recommending it as a game by itself. Therefore, I mostly praise it for its vision, its potential. That's the perspective we should take. It's a pioneer, it showed us ideas, it showed us possibilities, it shows us how awesome and epic a game can be with all its technological problems. And when you finish the game with all its problems, hiccups, and issues, close your eyes and imagine if all this potential and all the wondrous ideas it presented were made by a more experienced team with better hardware. That's why people keep bringing up Sonic Adventure. Not so much because it's a good game on its own right in the modern market, but because it made an amazing promise for future games that have yet to be fulfilled. Granted, I do think Sonic Adventure is still a fun enough game to play, maybe not the most technically sound, but still fun. But I totally get that last line about the promise for future Sonic games that have yet to be fulfilled. I think a lot of people who hate on Sonic simply feel betrayed by some of the worst games that came out after this, and it's made them so bitter that they just lump games like this into the same camp, as I said in part 1, because those games have just made it easy for them to do that. I do admit that Sonic Adventure never really met its fullest potential. If more of it was like what we got in Windy Valley Beta, this wouldn't just be an okay game, it would be downright amazing. Still, I felt I may as well look at all the other gameplay styles we got and break down why I don't think they're all that insufferable. If you've followed me long enough, you know that I like to look at games that, yes, have something wrong with them, or maybe a few things, and see if there's enough good in them that it outweighs the bad parts and makes it worth taking the time to play. And yes, I think Sonic Adventure is one of those games. People look at things like the flying sections, the characters' gameplay styles, and wonder what the hell Sonic Team were smoking when they made this. They criticize the game for having so much content, for being unfocused, saying things like, "Just make up your damn mind about what kind of game this is supposed to be." One thing you have to understand above all else is that this game was essentially an advertisement for all the different kinds of games the Dreamcast was capable of running. It's basically one giant tech demo, a pizza with everything on it. And if Sonic's gameplay suffered for it, if he wasn't properly developed and his levels weren't fun, I would indeed say this game is a mess. But Sonic doesn't suffer. He runs, he jumps, he collects rings, he bips, he bops, he works. And he's not just a sixth of the game, he's more like 30% of it, which may not seem much better to some people, but as I keep saying, he's still clearly the core of this game. He is the Sonic Adventure. In fact, as forgiving as I am toward the other characters, if it weren't for Sonic's gameplay being as good as it is, this game would fall apart. That's how much I think he saves the whole thing, completes this package. They didn't forget what was most important. All that other stuff is just tacked on. And seeing how much content they managed to cram in without ruining the most important part of the game, the one thing they absolutely had to get right, I'm willing to give them a pass for all its faults. There's another reason I'm so forgiving towards this game though, and it's not just nostalgia or whatever. It's a much bigger thing that I think goes for most of Sega's older games, and if I were just reviewing this game in one video, I'd say it here, but I'll save it for the last part of this series when I give my final thoughts on both adventure games. I still can't believe I was able to sum up everything about these three characters in this video in about as much time as it took just talking about Knuckles' gameplay in the last video. Well, I guess it's understandable in Knuckles' case since his gameplay is such a big issue in both games. For everything it does, most of Sonic Adventure 1's gameplay styles don't make a return in the far more focused and straightforward Sonic Adventure 2. And while I'd like to start talking about that game now, I think I'll save it for the next part, just to keep things clean, you know? People are really enjoying these videos so far, and I guess it's nice to see how as much as I've changed over the years, and my opinions have changed, some things haven't. And on that note, let's take a look at Sonic Adventure 2. If you've followed me long enough, you'll know that I've had pretty mixed feelings about this game. In the next video, I'll go over how some of my opinions have changed over the years. Doodles!